We're now live. I think we are now live. It looks like we're now connected.
Yes, we are. And how do I share it with my Facebook page?
You follow it.
Let's see.
There you go. So to everyone who's now joining us on Facebook, welcome. We haven't started the webinar yet, but we're joined by our presenters this afternoon, Dr. Farzaneh in conversation with Azadeh Pourzand. So without taking um, too much time, please note that if you want to share any questions with our panelists today, you may put it in the comment section here on our Facebook page. You may also email us at info@persia.education. And if you have registered or wish to register to join the webinar live, you can also share your questions and comments during the Q&A period after the presentation in the chat section of our Zoom webinar room. So we are now in a position to start if you are ready, if our speakers are ready.
It's not time yet. Can we wait a couple more minutes?
Minutes.
Yeah.
We have more minutes. Yes.
Yeah.
Um,
And I'm also trying to find out how I can share your Facebook page here.
Wonderful. We're early today to make sure that our Facebook Live session happens. I wish to apologize on behalf of Persia. Last time our Facebook Live session was disrupted beyond our control. So we are joining you a couple of minutes early this time to make sure that there are no technical issues and we get to enjoy the presentation this afternoon. So happy International Women's Day to everyone who's here with us and everyone who will be watching this after the webinar comes to an end. It's quite a unique presentation in the sense that we are going to become familiar with a wonderful book um, about a chapter in Iranian history that has never been written before from a very constructive and objective perspective, inclusive perspective. And the book is also unique in the sense that an Iranian male scholar has taken interest in the contribution of Iranian women to the country and to the history of an important part of our world. So, with those sentiments in mind and heart, again, welcome on behalf of Persia to our webinar on International Women's Day. And without mentioning too much, because our speakers are very well known to all of you, and their full bio was shared through our social media as well as our event pages. But just to say a few, highlight a few points really. Dr. Farzaneh is an associate professor of history at Northeastern Illinois University in Chicago. He was born and raised in Ahvaz, Iran, and lived in that area until Iraq invaded it in 1980. The war uprooted him and his family. He then moved to their ancestral home in Isfahan and later immigrated to the United States in 1984 to continue his education and completed his PhD at Southern California. For more information on the amazing work that he's doing and the Mossadegh Chair at Northeastern University, please visit the website and his social media pages. He is in conversation today with a fantastic figure from the Iranian human rights community, who's known to many activists and women's rights supporters. She's a civic entrepreneur. She's studied at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, and at the moment, she is continuing her studies as a PhD student at SOAS at UCL here in London. So with those welcoming remarks, I wish to now hand over the webinar to our discussant, Azadeh Pourzand, and ask her to please guide the conversation from here onwards. Once again, for those who are joining us now, please ensure that if you want to share any questions, it will be done so during the Q&A session following the presentation and consultation between Dr. Farzaneh and Ms. Pourzand. You may put your questions in the chat room section of the webinar. And for those who are joining us through Facebook Live, please put in the comments section or email us at info@persia.education. So Azadeh Jun, Ms. Pourzand, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Tahir-Jan, for your kind introduction. It's really my honor to be here with you, Dr. Farzaneh, and all the other guests who have joined today. I also congratulate all of you on the International Women's Day. Happy 8th of March. It's a difficult job to have, to be in my place and to do justice to this absolutely stunning piece of research and beautifully written prose that Dr. Farzaneh has put together under the name of Iranian Women and Gender in the Iran-Iraq War. Published and released very recently by the Syracuse University Press. Before I begin, I urge all of you to please go and purchase the book in any format that makes sense for you, and please read it. I have been just loving reading this book in the past couple of weeks. It's a fantastic narrative, really. And also, please tell your libraries, university libraries, to definitely purchase this book, because I think students who cannot afford it also really should have access to this book. I guess I just open it just a little bit, very briefly, about my very personal take on the book as I read it, and then I open it up so that we all hear more from Dr. Farzaneh, because I'm sure that's why most of us are here. Many of us who are mostly in the workforce nowadays, or active maybe in intellectual discussions, we are from the Iran-Iraq war generation of Iran. I personally was born in 1985, which is exactly in the middle of this war that is considered one of the bloodiest and longest wars of the 20th century. I think your experience of this war and post-war really depends on where you stand socio-economically or politically in terms of today's Iran. And where I was and how I grew up was that there were Iranians who were sacrificing their lives, in this war, but also because we were standing more as my family on the more anti-revolutionary side of the spectrum, there was a sort of alienation from who were these people who were fighting in this war, and a lack of familiarity. And if I want to be very honest, also fear, because it was really intertwined with the ideological approach of the state, with the repression that was, I don't even think we need to talk about it much, because many of us know that was happening in the 80s to many families, to many individuals. And so it was a bit of a void, if you will. It was something that we were always seeing on TV. Everyone was scared of their lives sitting in their homes, even in Tehran. But it wasn't really discussed much about, like, in terms of the life of those on the other side. And so when I was reading this book, I every single page of it for me was a learning experience, was a journey where I felt like Dr. Farzaneh, in his very eloquent way, was inviting me as his reader to think beyond very difficult baggage that some of us have, like me. You know, I have a very difficult baggage coming from a country that essentially I had to leave because of various human rights and political reasons. And I felt that his narrative was inviting me to pause for the few hours that I was reading this book, and to think about stories, experiences, perspectives, and to really try to think. For me, it was like this. In my human rights work, I try to work all the time on the questions of lost narratives and marginalization. And now he was inviting me to look at exactly the same topics of the narratives of the subaltern, in a way, and those whose voices are lost in history and marginalized from an angle that may be challenging for a person like me because of the biases that I have, given my personal experiences. And this book and the way the stories are told in this book, I think forever changed the way I'm going to speak about not only the Iran-Iraq war, but the experiences of the diverse nation that Iran is, not only ethnic-wise, religious-wise, belief-wise, but also in terms of socioeconomic standing of people and the experiences that may bring. With that in mind, Dr. Farzaneh, I would love to invite you to please tell us a bit about this work, and if you want more than a bit, because it's such a fascinating book. But also, I personally am interested to also hear about your motivation of going after this research that, as you explained in your introduction, is quite challenging. I mean, it looks to me like it was an odyssey for you to really conduct this research. And also, if you can, and if it's not too difficult for you emotionally, to tell us a little bit about your personal connection with why you engaged in this journey.
Thank you so much, Azadeh Pourzand, for that more than kind introduction. I don't know if it's worthy of all that praise, but I'll take it any day. Thank you so much for doing that. It's great to be with you. But before we start, I wanted to thank Dr. Tahir Danish and Persia Educational Foundation for inviting me. As soon as the book was announced that it was published, I think the first messages that I got was from her, and she locked this date, and I'm very happy to be here, and happy International Women's Day. I do believe that 21st century is the century of women. So what better way to actually talk about various different women that we might not actually all of us agree to include them as part of the discourse, social discourse, political discourse, and what have you. Going back to your question, what inspired me to write the book, I explained in the introduction, I was a war volunteer in Isfahan, as Dr. Danish had mentioned, 2 years into the war. And I would see women actually participating directly and indirectly in the war by way of either giving their material wealth by bangles in their hand. They would take off their gold bangles and they would leave it on the donation table. Or when I volunteered at the airport, when the injured were brought in, I would go into the helicopters. I would see women, nurses, first responders. Then at the hospital, I would see women surgeons and doctors. And I knew some women that were part of the revolutionary organizations, such as the Revolutionary Guards, and Basij, and definitely Red Crescent, where I was volunteering with. So that was kind of hacked in my mind till 26 years later, when I actually traveled to the south, and I went to the city of Khorramshahr that was invaded and occupied for 18 months by the Iraqis and had the heaviest casualties during the time. And I went into this mosque that is basically synonymous as the epitome of the Iran-Iraq War, Masjid Jame, or the Jame Mosque. And I noticed that there is not a single photo of women. If Dr. Danish would go to the third, I think, slide, then I have the photo that I took that day, actually. If you could advance. And in that photo, while it comes up, in that photo, I noticed that, one more, sorry. There you go. That's the photo that I took that day. And if you pay attention, of course, there are no photos of women, and these are all men, some clerics, some older people, some very young people. And all of a sudden, I started thinking about the women that I knew volunteering in Esfahan. And it just dawned on me, why isn't it that we don't talk about the women that actually participated, either voluntarily or involuntarily? Because if we think about it this way, we can go back to slide number 2, Dr. Danish, please. If we think about it this way, the fact remains, and this is a quotation from the book, for every male who fought in the Iran-Iraq war, there were at least one, and very likely 2, 3, or 4 females who helped them fight it. So the number of actually women that participated in the war were a lot more, and we could say they were into millions of women by virtue of having this connection. The war narrative has always been done from a male perspective, and we can talk about that during our discussion. But in 2009, where I made my trip to Khorramshahr, to the southwest, I was busy finishing up my own my PhD dissertation at the time, which was about the constitutional revolution. And this kind of, I put this idea in the back burner because I say this to my students, 2 topics that I never thought I would be interested to write about or discuss. One were women and gender, and the other one was military history. And as a man, regardless of my religion or my nationality or my background, as a man at the time, I didn't think there is much to discuss or much to want to learn, and I was very quite prejudiced. And I just have to say that I've gone through a process myself in understanding that, events, national events, global events, uh, do have half of the population, which are women. They are involved in it, like it or not. They are participants in a variety of ways. So I went through a rehab process, I could say, of appreciating that and basically documenting it and understanding and going over my prejudices of the past and kind of questioning what I was taught in the street, maybe at home, and in other institutions by the state, maybe. And this was a self-taught sort of a process as well, that I'm very happy that it came out in the form of a book. I don't know if I answered that question, but I'm sure we can talk about other parts of it if you like.
Thank you. Absolutely. And also, if you would like to highlight parts of the book, you can do now, or we can go into question. I have a few questions, of course.
Sure. I mean, it's important to know that some people might not be familiar with the Iran-Iraq War. So in the book, I talk about it in very briefly in one chapter, and I have it highlighted here in the slideshow. It became the longest war of the 20th century when it started. It happened only a month and a year and a half after the revolution had succeeded and the Islamic Republic had been established. It solidified the newly established Islamic Republic in many ways because the many revolutionary institutions that were very weak at the time, very grassroots, and these were the people that had joined the revolution that were not coming from the forefront of the society, but these people were in the background of the society. So these were the poor, these were the disenfranchised, these were, for the large part, people from the rural areas, from small cities, from the southern section of Tehran. As luck for them, maybe, would have it, or misfortune maybe from another perspective would have it. The war started, and in the process, it solidified not only the Islamic Republic, but the organizations that were born out of the revolution, like the Revolutionary Guards and Basij and Jawad Sazandagi, or the Construction Corps. Factually, we have over 837,918 women that actually participated in the war. I get this number from averaging the number of the dead men, the numbers that are released by the state, because we don't have a single number. We have several numbers, so I average that. And then the number of the POWs, prisoners of war, we had over 40 some odd thousand. Then the number of the women, number of the people that were injured, over 500,000, and the 208,000 that were actually killed. We currently have over 11,000 people that are still missing in action, mafqud al-asar. The number of women among them, we don't know. This number is based on the number that I got from the International Committee of Red Cross as of 2 years ago when I was writing that chapter. The number might have gone down by a couple of dozen by now. Officially, there were 41 women who were POWs, but other sources point to 171, and other sources point to hundreds. And that's a confusing number right now. From the perspective of the war narrative, if we could go to this next slide, Dr. Danish, please. I thought that the war narrative is an absolute all masculine affair. It's something that men did. That's how the state talks about it. And it's not only in Iran. This is a global phenomenon, a global concept, that prowess, chivalry, bravery, sacrifice, innovation, all sorts of things that are used in the war are basically given to men as something that men do. And women sort of serve as the background of that war. So they are either nurses or they have soup kitchens and what have you. So from that regard, the official war narrative in Iran today portrays the war as an all-male war, that men sacrificed everything, men protected the realm, women reproduced and offered their children. So it takes a sort of a sexuality concept into play when it comes to the war narrative. Women took care of family while men fought, which is not true. Actually, women did fight as well. And during my research, I looked at, and I didn't write all 20,000. So let me be clear that I didn't write, out of the 20,187 articles that mention men, this slide should say, only 93 of them mention women. So 20,187 articles were written in a variety of journals and newspapers and dailies from 1980 to 1988 to July of 1988 when the war ended. And the only ones that mention any word mentioning women, zan, zanan, khaharan, sisters, mothers, is only 93. So the number is just ridiculous, despite the fact that women, I would say, were the major engine behind the war in so many ways. So I'll stop there and we'll engage, I guess, in different ways and talk about the other parts of the book.
Thank you very much for this explanation. And also, I personally want to thank you for being so honest about your that process of rehab that you explained. I think on a day like today, it's great that all of us can openly talk about this experience of this journey. So thank you very much. One of the things that really struck me about your book, as someone who currently is back in the academia after many years, I sometimes really struggle with the inaccessibility of academic work, basically to a non-academic or to someone not from that particular discipline, in terms of the use of jargons and the way it's written and all of that. And your book is written in my opinion, intentionally in a simple prose and a beautiful one, and as a result is accessible. I think one of the things that make your book accessible, and at least it made me really relate to it beyond just an academic book, was these colorful, sometimes difficult to read stories that you bring into your book throughout the pages. And one of the things that we were actually discussing with a human rights colleague the other day is this challenge that we all have in the age of information, that we were saying that we feel we've become desensitized to numbers. We see numbers all the time, but that there is a story, like all those numbers that you showed, there's a story behind every single one of those women killed, injured, and so on. And I want to hear from you about your journey of interviewing on the ground with over 200 women, and just capturing those stories. And if you can, while talking about that, if you can also discuss a bit the challenge of positionality that you may have had in terms of, you being a man and basically a scholar from outside the country, now going into these local areas and speaking to some of the more marginalized communities. It would be really great to hear your perspective on that.
Thank you for getting 5 questions into one. I'll do my best if I remember all of them. I wrote some of them down.
If I want to summarize, it's basically the stories that your experience as a person who are interviewing these women, and how you captured them.
Well, let me put the first one out there. What you just said. When this book came out, I approached a lot of women that claim they want the story of women to be heard, to see if they would help me in promoting this, and none of them did. So there is a pushing back by women themselves. Sorry to say that they don't want men meddling maybe into their affair, and they don't want it mansplained, as some might put it in that context. And that's an unfortunate situation, because I don't see this as a man-woman thing. I see it as a human approach that we must have. If I talk about children, then are the children going to come out and say, this is our area and you shouldn't be talking about it because you're an adult? I think that's nonsensical in so many levels. And I'm sorry that that's going through, but it's only going to take time, and through education and more men stepping in to kind of pick up where we leave off. So from that aspect, I am kind of experiencing the reverberations of that mentality. There is a divide between Iranian women that we like and Iranian women that we dislike. For people that come from affluent backgrounds, and I always say north of Van Eyck Square or the roundabout, Shomal Van Eyck, people look at each other differently. There is a class struggle. There has always been a class struggle, even during the monarchy and after the revolution, even now. And what I've noticed is that women that are not fit in the description that we like to give of Iranian women, as educated and sophisticated and beautiful and without the hijab maybe, and with brand names that they wear and what have you. If they don't fit that description, or even less, if they're not educated, if they haven't gone to college, or even if they don't have a secondary diploma, we kind of tend to put them in a different category, and we kind of leave them be. And I talk about it in one of the chapters. I talk about state feminism and state women's right, as how during the monarchy, that was something from top to bottom. That's what the Shah or his sister wanted in so many ways, kind of given to people. These are the things we want our women to do. And it really starts with Reza Shah too, with the forceful removal of the hijab, which was a pure violation of invading a personal space of women, where women actually felt comfortable. And then you have state feminism of the Islamic Republic now, that again tells women exactly how to be. you must wear the hijab and you must act like this and you must behave like that. And so there are moral and social mores that are dictated to women, and the gender roles are dictated. So I wanted to concentrate on women that nobody else wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk about the women that are the majority of the Iranian women. The majority, I'm working on my next book. I have a couple of more books coming up about women. The next one I'm calling The Other Women, the mighty and the marginalized, because they are mighty and they are marginalized, and they are the other women. They're the women that nobody wants to talk about. They're the ones that one person sadly mentioned. They're the ones that grow mustaches and might have a special body odor, and how could anybody talk about them? Which really speaks to the essence of the problem here, not only from a social political perspective, but from an academic perspective, because we have to engage these women, we have to understand them. And although I'm an educator and I like to solve problems or get to possible answers through education, but those who have the challenge of wanting to become human rights activists, I think they should read this book and they should understand that there is a whole different world out there of women that think very differently, that act differently, but by all measures are exactly the same, because their feelings are just like the feelings of some woman that lives in India or in China or in the United States or in Rome or Paris. The feelings are not different. They feel love, they feel hurt, they like to basically be given the opportunity to speak for themselves. They like to be seen as, if not more, but no less than women. They like to be equal to men. They like to do things, and they do things that are just as hard as I might do or some other man can do. I do not put any difference between a woman that picks up a M1 rifle, which is an antiquated rifle at the time of the war, or an axe trying to defend her home in Elam, in the village of Awazin, a Kurdish woman that actually picks up an axe and attacks a Iraqi invader. I do not put any difference between her and Fahmideh or any of the Revolutionary Guards commanders or any of the regular military commanders that actually are heroes now in the war. There is no difference for me between those people, because the objective of both is the same, but it's given in a different light. And what keeps us away from actually understanding this is our bias. It's simply because we look at these women as part of an ideology, like Azadeh mentioned. We look at them in the context of the Islamic Revolution and all the hurt that people might have felt and all the injustices that they might have experienced. We put it in that context, and we basically mix everything, and we paint everybody with a common brush. And that's why we don't get to the answer, to the optimal answer that we need to get to, which is, do we really know our own people? Do we really know our own society? Do we know what these women are saying? And to lean into your next question about research and sources, when I was doing my first book, which is about Shia jurisprudence and this man named Khorasani in the Iranian constitutional revolution, everybody was giving me the dirty look at why am I looking at a religious figure to talk about something that for many people is so grand and wonderful, which is the constitutional revolution. What could an akhund or a mullah or a cleric have to offer? And people, without reading the book, basically judged that this is not a good, very good way to look into issues as grand as the constitutional revolution. And those who read it actually agreed that, no, this is a great way to look at it from a different perspective, because it shows you the reality on the ground of what was happening in those very crucial years. In this case, I noticed when I was going to Iran and I was talking to people when I started researching about the book, I would talk to my own colleagues in the Iranian studies circle, which I have some very good friends, dear friends, and no disrespect to them. People tended to kind of shy away from the project because they could not understand why I, living in California then and now in Chicago, would want to promote. They thought about it as a promotion of these women, and I looked at it as totally different. I said, if it's going to promote them, fine, because they're women, so I'm doing my job. If it's going to introduce them in a variety of ways that readers like to understand them, then that's fine too. That's the whole purpose of researching and writing. So I went and I actually looked at the sources that nobody else bothered to look, just like in the first account, when I went to home and I started studying a little bit of jurisprudence and see how jurisprudence works, and how rulings come about that become sort of like carved in stone in so many levels. I went directly to the sources that these women had written about themselves, which everybody wanted to ignore. If we could go, Dr. Danish, to the, I think, slide 6. There we go. Thank you so much. These are just some. I use a lot of primary sources that are stories of women that are told by themselves. And some of these might be familiar to you. Da, for example, is a very, very popular genre in Iran. The book is 300-400 pages. Is the story of this very young girl, a teenager in Khorramshahr, that gets involved in the war when the Iraqis arrive at the gates of the city, and he gets injured permanently, and he's disabled now, but he writes her story about those few weeks. He loses his dad and his brother in the war, and he marries a Revolutionary Guards commander at the time, and life takes on different kind of corners for her. And then Manzendam, or I'm Alive, which is the story of this woman who was captured as a POW, who was abducted, actually kidnapped in Khorramshahr on the Mashhad Khorramshahr route, and then taken to Iraq and kept in secret with 3 other women that I refer to as the quartet. And for months, nobody knew where they were, if they were missing, if they were dead or alive. And the International Committee on Red Cross didn't know anything about them because they were being kept in secret prison of Al Rashid, which is in downtown Baghdad, which is a notorious istikhbarat prison of Saddam Hussein, and they were tortured in a variety of ways. So she writes about her experience and other experiences that are in the other books. I noticed that nobody wants to bother these things or read about these books, and sometimes I would buy these books and I was just consuming them at lightning speed because I thought they were so fascinating, and taking notes so fascinating that their perspective is something that everybody's ignoring. Even the Islamic Republic itself, who is actually paying for these books to come out, they're actually ignoring it because they really don't believe in these stories from a gender perspective. The stories are true, but they're sort of shrugging their shoulders like, who cares, right? So you suffered, but look at the man. Look how they suffered in great ways. So I would take some of these books and I would take them to a coffee shop in the northern part of town in Tehran, and I would read them, and people would freak out because they would think that, for some reason I'm with the state, or I'm trying to promote something, and people would engage me sometimes in conversations, and it would just put people off. So I went directly where nobody else wanted to go. I think I can put it in that context. I read the things and I analyzed the things, and I allowed myself and I made myself be tolerant of the things that I might not be too friendly towards, for the lack of a better term, to kind of put me in a better position as a researcher to talk about these things. The interviews that you mentioned, some of these women were extremely open-minded in having a conversation about the experience in the war. I mean, Masuma Ram Hormuzi, who's written a few books about her experience. She's from Abadan. She's an Abadan native, also married to a Revolutionary Guard commander. Um, Very conservative, the type of woman that many people that might not be too keen with what has been happening with the Islamic Republic for the past 42 years would not want to carry a conversation. She was extremely delightful in the way that she experienced. She told me about her experience during the war, and why she told stories, and I talk about her quite a bit. There was another woman in Abadan who was the commander of the Sisters Basij, or Basij Khaharan, who nobody wanted or bothered to want to talk to her. She told her story through an editor a writer, number 5, Shomare Panch, which I don't have in this part, and her stories were just absolutely mind-boggling, and some were friendly towards my request for interviews and what have you, and very open, and they actually wanted their history and their story to be heard in the West more than they wanted their story to be heard actually in Iran, because they kept watching Persian news programs of variety, and how these people were put down and not looked at as humans to begin with, let alone as women. And one of them said, you know, maybe this would be a good lesson for them, that we're not all bad. We did everything exactly for what they're saying they want Iran to do. We wanted to keep Iran safe from the enemy, but our ideology was different. And what's wrong with that? But we did have a common objective. So, so these were the nicer interviewees, so to speak, and they were the ones that absolutely wanted nothing to do with me, because they believed I'm going to twist the story and I'm going to be dishonest in my sharing the stories, and maybe I would put them in a different light, in a more subjective way. And I've tried my earnest to be as honest and as forthcoming and as objective as I could. But for those historians out there, and many people know that history is anything but objective. So I do, you will see, if you read the book, you will see my prejudices, you will see emotions of a 14-year-old who was actually involved in the war. You will see the emotions of somebody who was displaced in the war. You would see and read about my own givings about the revolution, about the war, good or bad. And in that regard, I try to not wear my emotions on my sleeve, but at the same time, I didn't want to be so objective that I would take the human out of it. I didn't want it to be a dry story. And why it went on for 400 pages or so is because I wanted to include as many stories that puts these women in context, because I think that's what's missing here. We don't put our people in context. We are Iranians are more interested in characters, individual characters, which to a certain extent, when we're talking about historical research, we can maybe we'll lose the bigger picture. And I tried to create a bigger picture by going into individual stories, if that makes any sense. I'll stop there. That was a long answer, but
Thank
you
you very
gave me a
much.
long question too.
An insightful one. Thank you for this. I just wanted to say, since you brought up, human rights community, and I consider myself a member of it. One of the things that I felt when I was reading your book was that I think if Iran was open to many scholars who are interested in different questions of marginalization and narratives and oral history and all of that, a lot of interesting work would have also come out, from the perspective of many of us who work in human rights. Unfortunately, many of us who work in human rights find ourselves in exile, and as a result don't have the kind of access that some of the scholars have. And so I read your book with envy, that I wish I could have this kind of access. And I just wanted to say that. And also on the question of you writing as a man, I think the world is at a place where we are having these kinds of discussions, and it's beyond just Iran. I mean, I just, it catches my attention, the race issue, for instance, in the US with Black Lives Matter. Right now, there's a whole discussion about a translator who's white for, the poetry of a Black woman, or I don't know, in South Africa with Coetzee and a white person or mixed person writing about the Black experience. So I think this discussion is an ongoing one. And while I understand it's quite a difficult one for where you're sitting, but I also think that it's important that we think about it. And for me personally, it was very interesting that someone from your background had put yourself through essentially what I think is going through the route of reliving a lot of trauma to contribute to basically a part of history of Iran that is not there, that wasn't memorialized, as you mentioned. I saw it more from that perspective and appreciated it more from that perspective rather than a man writing about women. And so, in a way, for me, I saw you more as an insider, uh, and who's now coming back to it. I have a lot of questions, but because I want to also leave room for others to ask, I just want to highlight two things for those of us who are going to read this book, hopefully, that stood out to me very much is the diversity of roles that you talk about in the book in terms of women and their roles in the war. So, it's not just the family of martyrs or soldiers, it's also the roles they played, as you yourself say, in the front lines, as in medical staff, or as volunteers, and so on. And you also have a chapter on war prisoners, women war prisoners. So this diversity of roles was very very interesting for me, which I will come back to. And another thing that I find very I would say personable in your book was the fact that you paid attention to love and to romance in these unlikely places. If you can answer the love and romance one very, very short in a brief way, because I have a more difficult last question after that. Thank you.
Sure. I mean, one of the things, because the women of the state, I call them women that are in the various security organizations in Iran. You'll see them if you arrive in Iran, obviously, that there are women. If you're at the airport, you see them. They're part of the moral police and what have you. So it's very strange, including my own family. They view these women as emotionless, right? People that don't feel love, maybe, or maybe they're really rough at home. Maybe they don't love their man. Maybe they don't actually fall in love. It was a very, I should have known that this is normal. But when I read about it, it became more apparent that, wow, these women actually do fall in love. And the rough Revolutionary Guards commander that actually comes home does bring flowers, or does write love songs or poetries, or he does take a picture in the sunset while he's sitting in the date palms, right, where people are dying, and he's thinking about his wife, he's newlywed, and writes love letters, and includes a few grains of sand, as a souvenir to send to. I think these are very moving narratives that we miss out on, and it basically shows us that love was going on at the time. I tried really hard to get this photo, and I couldn't get the permission to actually share it. There is a photo that right after Operation Beitul Muqaddas, which essentially freed Khorramshahr after a year and a half. Right after that, like a few weeks after that, there is a wedding ceremony in Abadan. And they have actually put flowers on a military jeep. And they've actually wedded this woman volunteer and this man volunteer right there. And they're kind of cruising around city of Abadan that's in pieces, with smoke everywhere. I thought that's just a fantastic way to show that during war, things happen that are not always violent, that are not always gross, that are not always gory. And there are beautiful things that actually happen. And these romantic relationships do happen. Now, I know some people are going to say, there we go with the humanizing. Well, that's what history is. We talk about, as humans, we do things that are contradictory. As humans, we do things that are shocking to others, and as humans, we do things that are very beautiful to others. So we can't pick and choose. I don't think we have the liberty of doing that. I think we are obligated by scholarship, if we're really true to it. If we're really true to scholarship, you are obligated, I am obligated, everybody's obligated to look at these things from a variety of perspectives. And you're absolutely right. I challenge myself to put myself in a PTSD sort of an environment of being really antsy and impatient. And my wife and my little girl paid for that, obviously, because I would come out of, my writing, and I would be really snap really hard because I was just reading about these things. And I remember reading Manzendam or I'm Alive, the horrific experience of this woman, which is just way too much. It read more than the worst novel that you could read of And because it's put in a cultural context that I understand that, women cannot be put in these positions, surrounded by, and there's a little bit of prejudice too, Arab prejudice, right? Oh, these Arabs came and, kidnapped our women. And so all of these emotions kind of mixed up together, and it made for a horrible experience, as you said. But I thought, I was happy to do it simply because I thought the story needed to be told.
Thank you for that very
Sure.
nice answer. When I was reading your book, a quote stood out to me, which I think is a quote by another scholar, which reads as, "Women could not avoid being women, whatever they did." With this quote in mind, my question is, where are the women of your book today? Are they happy? And that's my last question.
Sure. That's Mary Beard's, I think, quotation, and she's right. No matter how much women sacrifice, no matter what innovations they come up with, no matter how they behave, no matter how they look, no matter what color their skin is, no matter how educated or not educated they are, no matter how beautiful they are, no matter what they wear, they remain as women. And they have always been prejudiced against. And chances are, without education, that will continue. As far as women in Iran are concerned, the people that actually participated in the war got nothing for it. The only thing they got were tears, their eyes looking at the door, waiting for their loved ones to arrive, right? And they were victims of chemical weapons. There were volunteers in Ahvaz that volunteered to wash uniforms and hospital gurney covers and what have you. And they did this with their bare hand, all volunteering for 8 years. And they didn't know all of these uniforms were actually polluted with warfare agents. And they're all chemical victims now, chemical weapons victims. And the government does not offer a single solution for them in way of getting treatment and what have you. The people that actually paid materially, of course, they're not compensated. They did that because they love their country. The people that paid with their loved ones, they're not going to get them back. The women who are still taking care of their loved ones at home as paraplegics, as disabled, as people that can't move their bodies and they have to use a bedpan 3-4 times a day, those things continue. That was their compensation for their participation, right? So if we're looking for a memorialization of these women, it hasn't happened. Someone might say, somebody was telling me when I was talking about this, when I was writing, kind of being grievous in so many ways, I was complaining to this person in Iran. And he said, well, those who participated did it for God, and those who didn't do it for God, they shouldn't be expecting any compensation other than what God might, afford them. And I thought, okay, that might be the answer for some of them, but not all of them, because the majority of women that I discuss in the book, I talk about over 200 women in the book. The majority of them, you have to be very keen and read between the lines as to what they say. The majority of them are perfectly fine with their participation. That's a beautiful thing. They're not complaining that why did I did this? None of them say that. But they are grievous to the point that we could be acknowledged. We could be at least said in the community that we did more than reproduce children to go to war. And we did more than crying over a few bones that were brought in after our kids were missing for so long. Somebody could come and tell us that thank you for participating and for allowing the state to do what it wanted, which was an absolute disaster, continuing the war for 8 years. So where are those women now? They're not happy, but they're not happy because they participated. They're happy because they're not being acknowledged. And I'll leave it at that.
So much to think about. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you, really. Thank you very much. For me, at least, there is so much to reflect on for the days to come. Tahir Jan, I think we are ready for questions from our wonderful audience. So I think it's in the chat box, or
Yes, there's one question from Sarah saying, did you encounter any problems in doing your research? And then we have another question that's come on through another means that I'll mention later.
Sure. Not at the time. There was hesitancy by some groups or organizations to share, because in the photos, I in the photo section of the book, I share photos or documents that were not public at the time, and the people that I talked to weren't sure again how I'm going to use this and in what context I'm going to talk about these women. Some of them wanted to make sure that I'm a revolutionary, which you know I couldn't answer, but I had to weave through a lot of politics, personal politics, and had to portray things, and I had to bring everybody back that I'm doing history, and it's not important if I'm a revolutionary or not. But some of them would not budge, and those that didn't budge, because I wouldn't say it directly or indirectly, would not participate. So that was the hard part. I say somewhere in the book also that doing research in humanities, social sciences, or apparently environment too, in Iran is like playing Russian roulette. You never know who is going to decide one morning, okay, let's get Mateo, and because he's done something so far, knock on wood, nothing has happened, and hopefully because I want to continue doing research and talk about the marginalized women in Iran, and that would require field work. We can't do it by sitting at a desk thousands of miles away. So hopefully none of that would happen, but it's a definitely it's a risky process for sure. Whether or not it's worth it, I can't tell at the moment.
Well, I think it was worth it because of the gift that you've given our community that we're beginning to discover, because the book has just been published,
Right.
and as mentioned by Azadeh in the beginning, is available to be ordered and studied, hopefully, as soon as possible. We have one other question that has actually come from the United States, asking what can we do from here to help these individuals in Iran?
Learn. Educate ourselves, and I'm including myself too, and I'm including my 7-year-old as well, and my wife. I want to tell you how old she is, but but definitely education, I think, is key, because I really don't see any other solution. I'm not a violent person, and I don't promote violence in any shape or form. I'm all for diplomacy. I'm all for a peaceful conversation. I think we have to make ourselves a little uncomfortable by going into arenas that we might not feel very welcomed, or even pleasantly or pleasantly participate in things that are not north of Van Eyck Square. I think that's the thing. We should talk to people, because if I want to talk to all my friends who might have a PhD or an MD or engineers or lawyers, that's not going to do me any good. I already know about them to a certain extent. I have to go to various parts of Iran. I have to go to the neighborhoods that nobody wants to visit. I have to talk to women that people don't want to listen to, because there is a galaxy, not a world, but a galaxy of deep knowledge that we're missing, I think. And you shouldn't expect them to do art as we like it. We shouldn't expect them to write as we like it, because it doesn't match our taste. So I think what we can do, to that person who was asking that very good question, is to learn more, and not only through this book but by others. I'm sure there are going to be much more works hopefully coming out about marginalized. I mean, Azadeh is doing stuff on ethnic and marginalized women. I mean, her work is going to be valuable in the sense that it's going to paint a different, and it's going to give you a different perspective than probably mine, maybe, or maybe not. But I think the solution, and people get bored when I say that because they say, oh, you're a professor. But seriously, there is no other solution other than education.
Well, I think that's a fantastic note to end on, because the very aim of Persia Educational Foundation is to promote the cause of education
Mm,
as a sustainable and urgent means to reconstruction of society in general, Iranian society in particular. And that's
mm,
something that we can do from anywhere
absolutely,
in the world,
absolutely, absolutely.
particularly today because of the means of communications that are available to us. And I think I cannot really honestly thank you enough, both of you, for putting this webinar together so quickly, despite all your other personal and professional commitments. This is particularly for Azadeh, who is a brand new mother. So on top of all her other commitments to her own heart, her home and family and society, she now has a very demanding position to fulfill. And in a matter of really a few days, she's read this voluminous book and prepared for this wonderful webinar. And thank you, Dr. Farzaneh, for being so open to engaging with us today, for sharing quite candidly the fruits of your journey of educating yourself and us about a chapter in our history that, frankly, I had never thought about. Although we've all lived through it, we've witnessed it, it had never occurred to me personally that there was a body of research there that needed to be uncovered. And I suppose that's part of the tragic impact of us getting used to having history written for us rather than by us.
Mm-hmm.
So to focus on the marginalized and minority communities in Iran is really the pathway to our salvation. And I'm grateful to you for writing this book. And I'm deeply moved that hopefully very soon we'll hear more from Azadeh and her amazing research on this very topic. So thank you for everything. And please visit our website and our social media for our upcoming webinars, educational webinars. In fact, we have one on the day of Chaharshanbe Suri, which is not this Wednesday, but Wednesday the 17th next week, with Armin Amiri, who is the producer of the first Iranian movie entirely done in the United States. And it's a fantastic piece. It's getting a lot of attention. And just like yourselves, Armin has been kind enough to choose Persia to share some information about this passion project with everyone around the world. So please visit the website for that and other upcoming educational webinars. Please support us. We have 2 fantastic scholarships and trying to expand them. Follow us, like us, comment, get in touch with us. We're here to serve the Iranian community in the United Kingdom, particularly young students who need help financially and mentoring and in any other way, as well as a larger community. So thank you very much, and have a pleasant rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you very
Azadeh.
much.
Thank you, Dr.
Thanks.
Danish.
Thanks
Thanks,
to you.
everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Faraj.
All right. Bye-bye.